Agnes Plumtree spilled iced tea down the quiet girl's skirt. What followed made the school board cheer. Hazel Fairweather adjusted her bulky cardigan as she crossed the threshold of Willow Creek Academy for the second time that week. At 16, she'd mastered the skill of blending into the background. Her lanky build, barely reaching 5'4", matched with her tendency to keep her auburn hair draped forward to partly shadow her face, rendered her the sort of pupil tutors neglected to quiz and schoolmates barely registered. That suited her perfectly. The corridors echoed with the everyday racket of teenage existence, but Hazel slipped through it like smoke, clutching her battered satchel and keeping her gaze pinned to the scuffed tile flooring. She'd enrolled at Willow Creek 2 weeks prior when her father's work relocated them to this sleepy Maine village, and Hazel had no intention of causing a stir. She'd long since learned that staying hushed and unseen was the safest route to navigating secondary school. "Watch it, bookworm!" A cutting voice sliced through her musings as somebody purposely shoved into her shoulder, sending her staggering sideways against a notice board. Hazel's folders tumbled across the ground, and she immediately crouched to retrieve them, her face flushing crimson with shame. Towering above her stood Tiffany Harrington, Willow Creek's self-appointed head girl. Willowy, raven-haired, and radiating the kind of assurance that arose from never questioning your spot in the social pecking order, Tiffany glared down at Hazel with blatant loathing. Bookending her were her two constant shadows, Penelope Davies, a delicate blonde whose innocent appearance concealed a wicked streak, and Bernice Carter, whose muscular physique and perpetual frown made her appear permanently poised for a scrap. "Honestly, could you be any more pathetic?" Tiffany persisted, her voice pitched just loud enough for the gathering throng of students to hear. "Scrabbling around on the floor like some grubby worm." Hazel's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her geometry textbook, but she compelled herself to stay composed. She'd encountered tormentors before at her previous academies, and she understood that reacting would only worsen matters. The optimal tactic was always to stay invisible, allow them their amusement, and await them to grow tired and proceed to easier prey. "I bet she's totally mute," Penelope offered with a saccharine giggle. "Or maybe she's too thick to grasp English. What's your issue, strango? Got nothing to say?" The assembly of pupils had swelled, forming a loose ring around the spectacle. Hazel could sense their eyes on her, some entertained, others uneasy but unwilling to intervene. She recognized the familiar dynamics playing out, the entertainment value of observing someone else be torn down, the relief that it wasn't befalling them, the collective choice that it was simpler to be a bystander than to get involved. Hazel ultimately gathered all her folders and rose gradually, still keeping her eyes downcast. She attempted to step around Tiffany, but the taller girl deliberately moved to block her passage. "Where exactly do you think you're heading?" Tiffany challenged. "We're holding a conversation here. Don't you consider it impolite to simply wander off when someone's addressing you?" I need to get to form," Hazel whispered, her voice barely audible. "Speak up," Bernice barked, stepping nearer. "We can't hear you when you mumble like that. What sort of name is Hazel anyway? Sounds old-fashioned. Are you even supposed to be in this school?" Hazel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she forced herself to remain calm. She'd heard variations of these taunts previously, and she knew that responding would only escalate the situation. What these girls didn't know, what nobody at Willow Creek knew, was that Hazel Fairweather had spent the last 7 years studying fencing. She held a foil master rating, was proficient with the épée, and had won 2 regional championships in youth fencing tournaments. Her slender frame was deceptive. Beneath her baggy clothes was a body honed by countless hours of practice, discipline, and dedication. But Hazel had made an agreement to her father when they relocated to Willow Creek. No more duels, no more conflicts. Her father had been horrified when he learned about Hazel's engagement in school fencing leagues at their previous place, and he'd made Hazel promise that she would attempt to be a normal teenager for once. That implied no fencing, no competitions, and definitely no utilizing her skills to resolve issues with tormentors. "My mum reckons people like her are what's dragging this school down," Tiffany continued, her voice growing louder and more assured as she fed off the crowd's attention. "Turning up here and taking spots away from real students." The first bell sounded, signaling 5 minutes until registration, and the crowd began to disperse reluctantly. Tiffany gave Hazel one last scornful look before flipping her raven hair and walking away with her friends, their laughter echoing down the corridor. Hazel stood there for a moment, breathing deeply and battling the impulse to demonstrate to these girls precisely what she was capable of. Instead, she adjusted her satchel and headed toward her registration class, attempting to disregard the whispers and stares that trailed her. The morning drifted by in a haze of awkward introductions and sideways glances. Hazel had grown accustomed to being the new kid, but Willow Creek felt different somehow. The academy was tinier than her previous ones, which meant there were fewer places to conceal and fewer faces to merge into. Every classroom she entered felt like a spotlight was shining on her, accentuating her outsider status. At lunchtime, Hazel grabbed a cheese roll and a carton of juice from the cafeteria counter and glanced around for somewhere to sit. The cafeteria was divided into the usual secondary school territories. The popular kids occupied the tables near the music system, the sportsmen occupied the center of the hall. The drama students had claimed a corner near the serving hatch, and various other cliques had staked out their respective territories. Hazel spotted an empty table near the back of the room and made her way over, hoping to eat in peace. She'd barely taken her first bite when Tiffany's voice boomed out across the cafeteria. "Oh my gosh, everyone, check it out! The weird new girl is eating all alone. How tragic is that?" Hazel kept her eyes on her cheese roll, chewing mechanically as she sensed the attention of half the cafeteria shift to her table. She could hear chairs scraping as Tiffany and her friends rose from their prime real estate near the music system. "Hey, Hazel!" Tiffany called out in a fake friendly voice as she approached. "We felt so awful seeing you sitting here all by yourself. Do you mind if we join you?" Without waiting for an answer, Tiffany slid into the seat across from Hazel, while Penelope and Bernice bookended her on either side. Hazel's grip tightened on her cheese roll, but she continued eating, hoping they would grow tired and leave. "You know, I've been mulling over our conversation this morning," Tiffany continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "I realized I might have come across as unfriendly, and that's not who I am at all. I'm actually super welcoming to new pupils." Penelope giggled. "Tiffany's like the nicest person ever. She was just worried about you this morning because you seemed so lost." "Exactly," Bernice chimed in. "We want to help you fit in here at Willow Creek. But first, we need to chat about your presentation." Hazel finally looked up, meeting Tiffany's eyes for the first time since the morning encounter. The raven-haired girl's smile was razor-sharp, and Hazel could see the calculation behind her seemingly friendly demeanor. "Your clothes, for instance," Tiffany continued, gesturing at Hazel's bulky cardigan and faded trousers. "I mean, I get that you're probably trying to hide your figure because you're self-conscious, but you're just making yourself look even stranger. And that hair, when was the last time you actually brushed it?" "Maybe she doesn't know how," Penelope suggested with mock sympathy. "Different people have different styles, right? Maybe where she comes from, looking like you just crawled out of bed is considered fashionable." Hazel set down her cheese roll carefully, her hands steady despite the anger building in her chest. She could feel the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded a duel, the way her vision sharpened and her muscles tensed in preparation for action. But she forced herself to remember her father's tearful face the night before they moved, the way he'd begged Hazel to promise that she would attempt to be different this time. "I think you're being too harsh," Tiffany said, though her tone suggested she was enjoying every moment. "Hazel just needs some guidance, some friends to show her how things work around here." "Is that what you want, Hazel?" Bernice asked, leaning forward aggressively. "Do you want us to be your friends?" The cafeteria had grown quieter, with conversations at nearby tables dying down as students sensed the drama unfolding. Hazel could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond to this very public humiliation. "I just want to eat my lunch," Hazel said quietly, her voice steady but barely above a whisper. "See, there's your first problem," Tiffany said, her friendly facade beginning to slip. "You mumble. How is anyone supposed to take you seriously when you can barely speak up for yourself? And sitting back here by yourself just makes you look like a total loser." "Maybe she likes being alone," Penelope suggested with a smirk. "Some people are just naturally antisocial. It's probably better for everyone if she stays isolated." Hazel stood up abruptly, gathering her half-eaten lunch and preparing to leave. She'd endured enough public humiliation for one day, and she could feel her carefully maintained self-control beginning to fray around the edges. "Where are you going?" Tiffany demanded, also standing. "We're trying to help you here, and you're just going to wander off. That's pretty rude, don't you think?" "I said I just want to eat my lunch," Hazel repeated, her voice slightly stronger this time. "And we're trying to explain why nobody wants to be around you," Bernice shot back. "The least you could do is listen when people are trying to help you improve yourself." Hazel turned to leave, but Penelope suddenly stood up and accidentally bumped into her, causing Hazel's juice carton to spill across the front of her skirt. The liquid was cold and immediately began soaking through the fabric, making Hazel gasp in surprise. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," Penelope exclaimed with obviously fake concern. "I'm such a klutz. Here, let me help you clean that up." Before Hazel could react, Penelope grabbed napkins from the table and began aggressively dabbing at Hazel's skirt, the rough paper tearing at the wet fabric and drawing even more attention to the scene. Hazel stepped back, her face flushing with embarrassment and anger. "Stop," Hazel said firmly, grabbing Penelope's wrist to prevent her from continuing the humiliating help. "Whoa," Bernice said loudly, drawing the attention of even more students. "Did she just grab you, Penny? That looked pretty aggressive to me." "I was just trying to help," Penelope said, pulling her wrist away dramatically. "Honestly, you don't have to be so violent about it." The word violent seemed to echo through the cafeteria, and Hazel could see heads turning at nearby tables. She realized that the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control, and any response she made would likely be twisted against her. "I need to go change," Hazel said, gathering her things and walking quickly toward the exit. "That's right, run away," Tiffany called after her loudly enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "Just like you did this morning. No wonder you don't have any friends." Hazel pushed through the cafeteria doors and headed for the nearest restroom, her wet skirt clinging uncomfortably to her skin and her cheeks burning with humiliation. She locked herself in a cubicle and took several deep breaths, fighting back tears of frustration and rage. She could have ended that confrontation in about 30 seconds, she knew. A few well-placed thrusts would have left all three girls on the floor, and the humiliation would have been theirs instead of hers. But she'd made a promise, and keeping that promise meant enduring whatever these girls decided to dish out. The afternoon brought more of the same treatment, though more subtle. Whispered comments as she passed in the corridors, deliberate shoulder checks when tutors weren't looking, and the constant feeling of being watched and judged. By the time the final bell rang, Hazel felt emotionally drained and physically tense from maintaining her composure all day. She was walking toward her locker when she heard Tiffany's voice behind her again. "Hazel, perfect timing. We need to talk." Hazel turned to see all three girls approaching, their expressions difficult to read. For a moment, she wondered if they might actually be planning to apologize for the day's events. "We wanted to talk to you about what happened at lunch," Tiffany said, her tone more serious than before. "I think there might have been some misunderstandings." Hazel waited, saying nothing but hoping that maybe the situation could be resolved peacefully. "The thing is," Penelope continued, "you really embarrassed us back there. Grabbing my wrist like that, acting all aggressive. People saw that, and now they think we were picking on you when we were just trying to be friendly. So we need you to set the record straight," Bernice added, stepping closer. "Tell people that we were trying to help you and you overreacted." Hazel stared at them in disbelief. Even now, they were trying to twist the situation to make themselves look like the victims. "I don't want any trouble," Hazel said carefully. "I just want to go to class and mind my own business." "But you already caused trouble," Tiffany snapped, her friendly mask finally dropping completely. "You made us look bad in front of the whole cafeteria, so now you need to fix it." "Or what?" Hazel asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. The three girls exchanged glances, and Hazel could see something shift in their expressions. The pretense of friendliness evaporated entirely, replaced by open hostility. "Or we make your life here a living nightmare," Tiffany said quietly, her voice carrying a cold certainty that made Hazel's skin crawl. "Trust me, we know how to make unwanted people disappear from this academy. Ask around. There have been others who thought they could just ignore us and do their own thing. It didn't work out well for them." Hazel felt a familiar calm settling over her, the same focused clarity she experienced on the fencing piste before a bout. These girls had no idea what they were threatening, no concept of what she was capable of when pushed too far. But she also knew that her father would be devastated if she got expelled from another school, especially this soon after their move. Hazel had already put her family through enough stress and upheaval. She couldn't let her own pride destroy the fresh start her father was trying to build for them. "Fine," Hazel said quietly. "I'll tell people it was a misunderstanding." Tiffany smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Good. I'm glad we understand each other. This could be the start of a beautiful friendship." The next few weeks fell into a predictable pattern. Hazel would arrive at school, endure various forms of harassment and humiliation from Tiffany's group, and then go home to lie to her father about how well she was adjusting to Willow Creek. The bullying escalated gradually, carefully calculated to stay just below the radar of tutors and staff. Her satchel would be accidentally knocked over, spilling her books and papers across the corridor floor. Her locker would be covered with sticky notes containing insulting messages that she had to peel off before anyone saw them. During games, she would find herself paired with Bernice for every activity, resulting in accidental elbows to the ribs and feet, stepping on her ankles. The psychological warfare was even more draining than the physical harassment. Tiffany had a talent for timing her attacks for maximum humiliation, always when there was an audience, but never when authority figures were present. She would make cutting remarks about Hazel's appearance, her accent, her family's economic status, and her social isolation, all delivered with a smile that could be interpreted as friendly by any adults who happened to overhear. Hazel found herself becoming increasingly withdrawn, eating lunch in empty classrooms or the library, taking longer routes between classes to avoid high-traffic areas where confrontations were more likely. She threw herself into her schoolwork, partly as a distraction and partly because academic achievement was one of the few areas where she could still feel successful. Her grades were excellent, which unfortunately provided Tiffany with new ammunition. Hazel would be called a try-hard and accused of making everyone else look bad by actually doing the assigned reading and participating in class discussions. When she scored the highest mark on a particularly difficult physics test, Tiffany made sure to loudly speculate about whether she had cheated, planting seeds of doubt about Hazel's integrity among their classmates. The worst part was the isolation. Hazel watched other students who witnessed the harassment look away uncomfortably, clearly recognizing what was happening but unwilling to get involved. She understood their reasoning. Tiffany's group wielded significant social power at Willow Creek, and standing up to them could easily result in becoming their next target. But understanding their motivations didn't make the loneliness any less painful. Hazel's father began to notice changes in his daughter's behavior. Hazel, who had always been quiet, became almost completely silent at home. She stopped talking about school entirely, deflecting her father's questions with vague responses about everything being fine. She began having trouble sleeping, lying awake at night replaying the day's humiliations and imagining different ways she could have responded. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning in late October. Hazel was walking to her registration class when she heard Tiffany's voice behind her. "Hazel, perfect timing. We need to talk." Hazel turned to see all three girls approaching, but something was different this time. Their expressions were more serious, more focused, and Hazel felt a chill of apprehension. "We've been thinking," Penelope said, "and we've decided that our current arrangement isn't working out." "What arrangement?" Hazel asked, genuinely confused. "The one where you stay out of our way and we let you exist at our academy," Bernice clarified. "The problem is you're still here, or still taking up space, still breathing our air, still making everyone uncomfortable with your weird old presence." Hazel felt her heart rate increase, recognizing the familiar signs that a confrontation was about to escalate beyond their usual verbal harassment. "We've decided it's time for you to transfer schools," Tiffany announced. "Find somewhere else to be weird and antisocial. Maybe an academy with more people like you, where you'll fit in better." "I'm not transferring," Hazel said quietly but firmly. "I have just as much right to be here as anyone else." The three girls exchanged glances, and Hazel saw something pass between them, some kind of silent communication that made her muscles tense instinctively. "That's where you're wrong," Tiffany said, stepping closer. "See, this is our academy. We've been here for 3 years. We know everyone. Everyone knows us. You're just some random weirdo who showed up a few weeks ago thinking you could just fit in and be accepted. But you're not accepted," Penelope continued. "Nobody likes you, nobody wants you here, and nobody would miss you if you disappeared tomorrow. So we're going to help you make the right decision," Bernice added, cracking her knuckles in what Hazel recognized as a clear threat. Hazel looked around the corridor, noting that it was relatively empty. Most students were already in their registration classes. The few who remained seemed to sense the tension and were actively avoiding eye contact, clearly not wanting to get involved in whatever was about to happen. "I'm not looking for trouble," Hazel said, taking a step backward. "I just want to go to class." "Too bad," Tiffany said. "Trouble found you." What happened next occurred so quickly that later witnesses would have difficulty agreeing on the exact sequence of events. Bernice lunged forward first, clearly intending to shove Hazel against the lockers. But instead of stumbling backward as expected, Hazel sidestepped smoothly, using Bernice's momentum against her and sending the larger girl crashing into the metal doors with a resounding clang. Penelope reacted next, throwing a wild punch at Hazel's head. Hazel ducked under the swing effortlessly, her body moving with the fluid precision of years of training. She grabbed Penelope's extended arm and used a basic fencing maneuver to send her tumbling to the floor, where she landed hard on her back with a surprised yelp. Tiffany, seeing both her friends neutralized in a matter of seconds, stood frozen in shock. Hazel straightened up slowly, and for the first time since arriving at Willow Creek, she looked directly into Tiffany's eyes without flinching or looking away. "Stay down," Hazel said quietly, her voice carrying an authority that made both girls on the floor remain exactly where they were. The transformation in Hazel was startling. Gone was the hunched posture and downcast eyes. She stood tall, balanced on the balls of her feet, her hands relaxed but ready. Everything about her body language screamed dangerous competence, and Tiffany suddenly realized that they had been tormenting someone who could have destroyed them at any point over the past month. "What the heck are you?" Tiffany whispered, her voice shaking. "Someone you should have left alone," Hazel replied. By now, the commotion had attracted the attention of other students, and a small crowd was beginning to gather. Hazel could see phones being pulled out, could hear excited whispers as word spread that the weird, quiet girl had just taken down two of the academy's most notorious bullies in about 10 seconds. Bernice was trying to get back on her feet, her face red with embarrassment and rage. "You freak!" she shouted. "You're going to pay for that!" She charged at Hazel again, this time with more caution, but still nowhere near the skill level needed to challenge someone with Hazel's training. Hazel waited until the last second, then grabbed Bernice's jacket and used her attacker's own momentum to throw her over her hip in a perfect hip toss. Bernice hit the floor hard, the wind knocked out of her lungs. "I said stay down," Hazel repeated, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of warning. Penelope was back on her feet now, her eyes wild with humiliation and anger. "This isn't over, you psycho. You can't just attack people." "Attack people?" Hazel repeated, genuine bewilderment in her voice. "You mean like you've been doing to me for the past month? Like you were doing 30 seconds ago when you tried to punch me in the face?" The crowd was growing larger, and Hazel could see several tutors pushing through the gathering students. She knew that in a few moments, this confrontation would be over and the real consequences would begin. But for right now, for these precious few seconds, she was finally able to speak her truth. "I tried to be invisible," Hazel continued, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each word. "I tried to ignore you, to stay out of your way, to be the perfect victim who would just take whatever you wanted to dish out. But you couldn't leave me alone, could you? You had to keep pushing and pushing until you finally pushed too far." "Hazel Fairweather!" Headmaster Thompson's voice boomed across the corridor as he approached the scene. "What is going on here?" Hazel turned to face the headmaster, noting the shocked expressions on the faces of the students around her. Many of them had watched her being bullied for weeks without saying a word, and now they were seeing her in a completely different light. "These 3 girls have been harassing me since my first day here," Hazel said clearly, her voice carrying across the corridor. "Today they threatened me and then physically attacked me. I defended myself." "That's not what happened," Tiffany protested, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "She went crazy and attacked us for no reason." Headmaster Thompson looked around at the scene. Bernice still on the floor holding her ribs, Penelope leaning against the lockers with tears in her eyes, Tiffany standing several feet away from Hazel as if afraid to get closer. Then he looked at Hazel, who stood calmly in the center of it all without a mark on her. "Everyone involved my office now," he said firmly. "The rest of you, get to class. Show's over." As they walked toward the headmaster's office, Hazel caught sight of her reflection in a window and barely recognized herself. For the first time in weeks, she was standing up straight, her shoulders back and her head held high. She looked like someone who commanded respect, someone who wouldn't be pushed around or intimidated. The meeting in Headmaster Thompson's office was tense, but ultimately satisfying. When he asked for witness statements, several students came forward to describe the weeks of harassment they had observed, painting a clear picture of sustained bullying that had finally escalated to physical violence. The hallway surveillance cameras corroborated Hazel's version of events, showing clearly that Bernice and Penelope had initiated physical contact. "Miss Fairweather," Headmaster Thompson said after reviewing all the evidence, "while I can't condone violence as a solution to conflicts, it's clear that you were acting in self-defense against an unprovoked attack. However, I have to ask, where did you learn to fight like that?" Hazel glanced at her father, who had been summoned to the academy and was sitting beside her with a mixture of pride and concern on his face. "I've been training in fencing since I was 8, Hazel admitted. "I have a master rating in foil, and I've competed in regional fencing tournaments." Headmaster Thompson whistled softly. "And you never thought to mention this when the bullying started?" "My dad made me promise to try being a normal teenager this time," Hazel said quietly. "No fencing, no competitions, no using my skills to solve problems. I really tried to keep that promise." "Well," Headmaster Thompson said. "I think we can all agree that sometimes circumstances force us to break promises in order to protect ourselves. Miss Harrington, Miss Davies, Miss Carter, you three are suspended for 3 days for harassment and initiating a physical altercation. When you return, you will stay away from Miss Fairweather completely. Any further contact between you and her will result in expulsion. Do I make myself clear?" The 3 girls nodded silently, their earlier bravado completely deflated. "Miss Fairweather," the headmaster continued, "you're not being disciplined because you were clearly defending yourself. However, I'm going to strongly recommend that you consider joining our fencing team or maybe starting a self-defense program for other students. It seems like you have skills that could benefit the entire school community." As they left the headmaster's office, Hazel's father put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "Not for fighting, but for trying so hard to keep your promise, and for finally standing up for yourself when you had no other choice." The remainder of Hazel's time at Willow Creek was dramatically different from her first month. Word of the confrontation spread quickly, but instead of making her more isolated, it earned her a level of respect she had never experienced before. Students who had previously ignored her began nodding in the corridors, and several approached her to share their own stories of being bullied by Tiffany's group. Hazel discovered that she wasn't the only student who had been targeted. Over the past 3 years, Tiffany, Penelope, and Bernice had systematically terrorized anyone they perceived as different or vulnerable. Several students had transferred schools rather than continue enduring their harassment, and others had suffered in silence just as Hazel had. The 3 bullies, meanwhile, found their social status significantly diminished. Other students began speaking up about their behavior, and many of their former followers distanced themselves from the group. They completed their suspension quietly and returned to school with a much lower profile, no longer wielding the social power they had once taken for granted. Hazel did join the fencing team, and she also started a peer support group for students dealing with bullying. She discovered that she had a talent for helping others find their own strength and confidence, teaching them that standing up for yourself didn't necessarily mean fighting, but it did mean refusing to accept abuse. Headmaster Thompson was true to his word about the self-defense program. Hazel began teaching basic self-defense workshops after school, focusing on awareness, de-escalation, and confidence building rather than fighting techniques. The workshops were popular with students of all backgrounds, and Hazel found that she genuinely enjoyed teaching and mentoring her peers. The experience changed Hazel's relationship with her own abilities as well. She realized that her fencing training wasn't just about fighting. It had given her discipline, confidence, and inner strength that served her well in all areas of life. She didn't need to hide that part of herself or pretend to be someone she wasn't in order to fit in. By the end of the school year, Hazel had transformed from an invisible outsider to one of the most respected students at Willow Creek. She had close friends, was involved in multiple extracurricular activities, and had earned the admiration of both students and faculty. More importantly, she had learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't won with swords, but with the courage to stand up and refuse to be victimized. The bullies had picked on what they thought was an easy target, but they had unknowingly chosen to mess with someone who possessed not just the physical skills to defend herself, but the moral strength to do so without losing her humanity in the process. Hazel's victory wasn't just personal. It was a triumph that made Willow Creek a safer and more welcoming place for everyone. Text, 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 text,